Our final presenter this morning is another passionate and extremely active laboratory director and past president of ASCLD, Dr. Ray Wickenheiser, the laboratory director of the New York State Police. Ray will be giving a summary of the disaster victim identification workshop that was held this past Sunday in St. Louis. We cannot prepare for every eventuality, but this type of workshop is invaluable, and I can guarantee every participant at that workshop is better prepared in the event of a mass disaster. If you could please welcome Dr. Ray Wickenheiser.
Thank you, Scott. So I'm just going to actually do a bit of a quick introduction of the folks who will actually really be doing the heavy lifting in terms of the talking about summary from our disaster victim workshop. I do want to put in a bit of a plug for our ASCLD Rapid DNA task force as a group, and welcome all of you to join it. So the DVI is one of our subgroups, and a lot of our work this year was focused on producing this workshop. So I did want to thank Mary Beth Carr of St. Louis PD Crime Lab, Dr. Mandy Sozier of SNA, and Chris Miles of Department of Homeland Security. And Mandy and Chris will be the ones who will actually be doing the presentation and put on a lot of the workshop. RTI also for their sponsorship. So we had about 43 participants and almost the same number of people as resource staff who put on the workshop. It was a great success. It was on Sunday, and for those of you who were not able to join us, this is really a summary to talk about some of those lessons learned and how you might get involved in the future. One of the things, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And even in putting on the workshop, there's a tremendous amount of things that were learned, just even putting that together, and we'll be happy to have these shared with you by Mandy and Chris. So the goal of our committee is to put together, of course, you look at ASCLD, what is our goals as a group, education and collaboration. What we want to do is put together a toolkit, provide that network, and get rapid DNA instruments into the hands of crime labs. And disaster victim identification is one of those things that's a lesser bar than the adversarial court system that we're used to. And as a way to get that experience, we should be the stewards of the discipline, forensics that we oversee, and being able to provide that expertise to law enforcement and other folks that would be the ones that actually use it. So what we want to do is get that network together, have that toolkit so we've got all the same best practices, and have that network, if you will, of nodes of crime labs and other partners that once something does happen, if your lab is involved, you can make the call and all of the folks would come in and be able to use the same standard agnostically with whichever vendor and work together. And practice makes perfect, and this was one of those exercises. So I'd like to welcome up Chris and Mandy and have them do the presentation, invite all of you to join us in our working group so we can share those best practices. Chris and Mandy.
So Mandy and I, if we can both fit up here, I think we're going to co-present this or something. We had the pleasure of doing the DVI workshop on Sunday. How many of you attended? A few, okay. It was a great event. It was conducted by the Disaster Victim Identification Subcommittee. I'm Chris Miles. I'm with Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate, so we helped support it, the NIJ Forensic Technology Center of Excellence and SNA International, and Dr. Sozier is the S in SNA. So I think most of you know her, and it's organizations like hers that make us in the federal government smart. So really appreciate all of their work they put into the DVI workshop. We started the morning really with a welcome time. Ray and Dr. Sozier presented on what the point was for the day, and we had a few overview presentations on what a family assistance center is, how family members come in and how their information is collected through the, I never get it right, the victim identification form, or no, the profile, VIP form. And Greg Kometz from the FEMORS, the Florida Emergency Management Organization, gave that presentation, really an excellent overview of how you collect all that information. I was impressed. Years ago, I went to the National Association of Medical Examiners, and they were talking about the ways that you identify a person. And it started off with dental examination and doing an x-ray, and way down at the bottom of the list was DNA. And I think in a fairly few number of years, we've shifted that quite a bit and helped move that up. And that's really what we talked about in the rest of the session. Elias Katanis from the National Transportation Safety Board gave us a great talk on legislated versus non-legislated incidents. When is it? When does the state ask for help, and how does that help get provided, and down to local levels. And then we looked back in history at the DNA operations in Katrina, and really the cooperation and the participation of all of those people that participated in making that a success, and the response to the community down in New Orleans. But more recently, we looked at the rapid DNA use at the campfire in in Paradise, California. And these are a few of the slides and other ones that I've got on the California campfire and what was part of that response. If you don't know much about that, Paradise is a community that's about 90 miles north of Sacramento, California. It's about 27,000 people, and the fire started on November 7th or November 8th. And the orange area there in that slide is the area that was burned out. The fire moved through that area at about 60 miles per hour, which you just can't imagine what that is like. It's not one of those instances where cars were caught on the road there. They had to be pushed out of the way by front loaders in the fire department so that people would even leave town. And they worked closely with the morgue in Sacramento. They brought the bodies down twice a day, 2-hour drive, to get the victims down there and start doing autopsies on them so that they could identify what was left of those victims. And it was really surprising because they were really cremains, most of them, and it really surprised both the DNA community and Rapid DNA Company, Andy, that had volunteered to do that work, as well as those of us that have been in the community for a long time. We just thought there's no way you're going to get good profiles off of those remains. And yet they did. 74, I think, out of the 85 victims were identified using DNA. They had DNA from 300 family reference samples. And so within about a month, they pretty much completed the identifications of the victims from that incident, and really turned DNA from last resort to pretty much the first resort for these events. And I think this is kind of the point of the DVI workshop, is to look at new technologies and then look at change, and how do we adopt that and adapt it into responses that we can do as a community. So it was really a workshop from the very beginning to the very end that was all about change, and I was really impressed by how everyone worked together to make that happen. And we did that through a scenario, an example that we put forward. We had a rubber bands company, hypothetical rubber band company here in St. Louis that had a massive explosion and fire. We were told, they had 200 employees and 40 staff, 60 children were there visiting from a local school. There were visiting international representatives. Some of them were transported as victims back to the hospital. Others were treated on scene. And then there were fragmented remains left behind in some of the rubble from the building collapse. And, I've done exercises before. I have actually been out to Paradise, but when you sit down and you get all that data thrown at you, and and the question at the bottom of the page says, how many rapid DNA machines do you need? That is a challenge. When do you need them, and what other resources do you have, and what are available, and what could you get? And I'll tell you, just from my little experience, have a tendency to go, I don't need anyone else's help. I'll do what I can do, but I don't need help. And I think that's the response of a lot of critical incidents are, no, we know, we've practiced this before, we don't use that. So don't tell me about that new thing. And so as a community, we have to figure out how to adopt that early on and practice that. So that was what the day gave us, was the opportunity to sit down and plan through events, plan through what was happening. We did 7 different stations, so it wasn't about sitting at a table all day, it was about moving through the process together. So I'm gonna turn it over to Mandy. I think she's gonna talk about each of the stations and what we learned from them and some of the lessons learned, and I'll give it to you, Mandy.
Thanks, Chris. I just want to reiterate on how exciting it was to see rapid DNA used at the campfire. And when Chris and I were there and meeting with people, 2 things that I think came to mind. When we just walk up to someone, and we heard this over and over again when we were talking to people, the first thing they'd say is, the fire moves so fast. It just moved so fast, it was unbelievable. And then the second thing they'd say to us was, we were not prepared. We never would have imagined that something like this would happen to us. So, you know, kudos to ASCLD for getting the group together and starting to get prepared to start thinking about these types of things. So in the afternoon, after the tabletop exercise, that most people thought was too short, it probably was about a day's worth of work that we put into a couple hours. And that was really the whole day. It was just the experience of things, just starting to kind of get to understand how complex it can be. We went through 7 different stations, and these stations are just a portion of the tasks that are done in a mass fatality response, and things where we really just kind of focused on the DNA areas. So the first station, everyone was broken up into 7 different groups. So you were lucky if you started at station 1 and ended at station 7, because that was somewhat in order. Some people started at station 6 and then went to 7 and then to 1, but they all were able to kind of see the full range of things. Station 1 was where we did ante-mortem interviews, so where we had actors come in. These are the people with the green shirts. The gray shirts were the subject matter experts and the people running the presentation. But the people with the green shirts came in and acted like they were family. They were given some information to report missing individuals. And they went through this process. And as DNA analysts, at least for me, I'm really comfortable being back in the lab, just using my pipettes, and it's often hard. You know, you talk to attorneys, you talk to police, but you don't talk to families. So this was, you know, an experience for them. Station 2 was the next station, so after the antemortem data was collected, often this may be together. We would collect DNA samples and collect more information on the families. We separated them out in this exercise more for logistical purposes than anything else. But at station 2, the participants really got to learn more about why do you want to collect more than just one family reference sample, and how important it is to understand the family structure so that when you do the DNA analysis, you will get better results. Families are complex, and people aren't always related the way they think they are, so it's really important to do this. So they were able to talk about, you know, drawing the family pedigree and also collecting the buccal swab samples. The third station that we went to was running the family reference buccal swabs. So we had 6 machines there. Thermo Fisher had 3 hit 200s and 3 hit IDs. They ran 24 profiles in the afternoon. We could have run more if we kept going, but we had to leave at the end, you know, pack everything up and leave. But the profiles, as you can see here, you know, they're beautiful profiles that were being generated in real time while families were being interviewed. The next.
Did you just call me sexy or beautiful or?
Oh, I said, oh yeah, that was Chris's profile. They were beautiful profiles.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, I'll show some others, but it was really showing how we brought the equipment in, it was set up the day before, and in less than 24 hours, we were running profiles. Station 4, the people were able to meet with someone from FEMORS and NTSB and kind of learn what kind of questions that families ask in reference and what the public will ask in reference to DNA testing. And then we moved on and we actually were extracting or prepping postmortem samples. So Andy was there and they prepped bone and muscle. So we were doing it in real time. And then we had a Sprinter van outside from Customs and Border Protection where that was done outside. And then they moved into where the Andy instruments, we had 4 Andy instruments. And I don't know whose bone this is. I don't think it's yours. You look pretty intact, but it's a beautiful bone profile. And if you see that this is the bone, you can imagine that the muscle was just as beautiful. So I believe they ran 16 profiles. We kept them going throughout the day. So when individuals came in, they could see how the instrument was run. A lot of people, I don't think, realized that the profiles were being run while they were moving through the stations. And then finally, DHS has developed some software to store, match, and share DNA profiles, specifically for kinship testing and direct matching. And they saw a little bit of that software that was demonstrated and to show how kinship matches are made and the new software that can do this pretty quickly with the new algorithms that are being used. So it was an exciting day, lots of lessons learned. People were, whoa, I didn't realize how much, how many things were going on. And we had a discussion at the end of the day as to, what are the next steps in moving forward. I'm just gonna read some of those. Standardization. People are gonna be bringing their instruments. This is kind of about, can we bring instruments, have them all over the US, and then in an incident, have them come together and have people that are trained come together with all of their instruments and do a pretty quick response. I know this would have been a game changer in Hurricane Katrina to be able to do the DNA testing that quickly. I think really would have changed the political aspects of how responsive is the government. But if we do that, we have to be standardized. We have to have similar naming conventions. So in different states, some states may call it a family assistance center, victim identification a center, or VIC. Can we, at least as a DNA community, come up with some standard nomenclature so that when I go from one state to another or one location to another, I seamlessly integrate with everyone else? Quality control and validation sets. Can we standardize those so that when we bring our instruments in and performance check those, we know that they're working? Training. Can we have training docs and standardization so that everyone's trained the same way? What about accreditation? That was discussed. If you're an accredited laboratory and is this outsourcing? What is this? How does that fit in? Let's have those discussions now. And then also our emergency management compacts, so that if one state helps another state, how will that reimbursement take place? And so we had a really nice discussion on that, and we have some next steps in moving forward. Number one, we're going to continue to work on the DVI subcommittee deliverables. We had some process maps. We had some deployment checklists. We had started to talk about EMACs, and we had the rapid DNA needs assessment. We were actually able to get through that in the tabletop, so there were some good comments about how we might be able to enhance at least the checklist in moving forward. We have a lot of deliverables, a lot of documents that were pulled together for this. We're going to try to get those onto the AskCloud website so that people can download those and start to look at them. There was a resounding, the tabletop was too short, we would have liked a lot more time, we wanted a longer experience. So fortunately, at the Human Identity Trade Association meeting September 22nd, which is a part of ISHE, which is going to be in California this year. September 22nd from 1 to 5 p.m. ASCLD is going to collaborate with Human Identity Trade Association, and we'll do a longer workshop, kind of focusing on another disaster, having people start to talk through what do they need to do will help us identify next steps in moving forward to refine the deliverables and identify additional response tools that will be helpful to the community.
I think it was amazing that we brought together 10 rapid DNA systems for this event. You know, we just put the call out, the companies responded, we brought our systems from S&T, and that's really the challenge going forward, is how we as a community can respond to events that occur. I know ASCLD has helped with bringing first responders and laboratory specialists down to Puerto Rico to help with the Hurricane Maria down there. There was response, as I showed, to Paradise, California, and unfortunately with hurricane season upon us and other things, it's just a matter of time until the next disaster victim incident occurs. And I know we as a community can help define what resources we have, what capabilities we have, and be available when something bad happens. And through FEMA, it's part of DHS. We're trying to work with them. We've got the DNA equipment and the DNA consumables on their approved equipment list for purchase by state and locals, so it can be a part of a grant. I'd encourage you to get to know whoever your FEMA state coordinator is. They may be somebody you know or a drinking buddy from college that you're aware of, and get them to know that you need a rapid DNA instrument. You could be using it every single day in your crime lab, and then when a mass casualty occurs, you have it put in its box and shipped to the location, and the next day you're up and operating and helping with that incident. And so we're working through how those processes will work, what policies need to be put in place, the agreements to share equipment and do that. And I really look forward to what the DVI subcommittee can do in planning for these future events. And really do want to thank our sponsors, speakers, the actors that we had, all the station leaders. I was amazed that they didn't know what was happening. They didn't know that the sample family was the Corleone family. And so, you know, we make up simulated information so that we can get through exercises and tests, but it really helps us to plan ahead. And thank you to all of you that came to that event, and thank you for your support of the DVI subcommittee. And thanks, Ray.
If I could ask all the presenters maybe to join me on the stage for question and answers. So if I can open up to the floor for so many questions. Over there.
Good morning. Thanks for the great presentations. I'm from the Arkansas State Crime Lab, and my question really is for Lyndon Jackson on the hemp. Our Department of Agriculture is gearing up to test hemp products, which I imagine most other states are doing the same thing. I think they received a lot of funding in our state, funding and appropriation to do that. So I was at a prosecutor's meeting recently, and a prosecutor said, if we have these, who do we send it to? Are we sending it to the crime lab, or are we sending it to the Department of Agriculture? Are you facing something like that?
So we are definitely also facing that, in that we have our Division of Consolidated Labs that has been they've been taking up the testing for the regulatory process for the growers, and doing that, compliance testing for the crops and that kind of thing. Our line that was drawn for us in the sand by our Attorney General's office was the regulatory versus the criminal. So if it's an investigation into are they meeting the regulation for something that's defined in the regulation, so if they're making products for, that's part of your regulatory process, that definitely should not come to the crime lab. But if it is, there's some understanding that they might be breaking the criminal law, and those would be the ones that would come to us. So the way it's defined in Virginia for plant material, plant material is coming to us. We are either calling it we're calling everything marijuana that tests positively, because it's the affirmative defense where the defendant has then they are the ones that have to bring up the fact that they have a registration, and so it's marijuana unless they have that. And so the only time we're planning on doing quantitations in those types of circumstances would be if, I know this is a shock, but it's possible that people who grow hemp might also smoke marijuana. And so, I don't know, just as an example. So if there was a question as to maybe a bag that was on the car seat of someone who was a registered grower that didn't seem in line with what would be expected as part of the regulatory product stuff, if they had that registration, they would have to send that to that bag of marijuana that was on their seat of their car to us to do the quantitation, to be able to definitely be able to prosecute them as having marijuana. So yes, we are going to spend probably $1,000 to do a quantitative test for something that will end up being a $50 fine, but that's the way the law is written.
Thanks, and I would encourage other states to take advantage of their Department of Agriculture. They're next door. They're going to share their methodology with us because they had the funding to develop that.
Also for the quantitative method, the Colorado lab has already validated a method that Sean West, I just sent him an email and I said, do you mind sharing your method? And I had it within 5 minutes. So if you know him, that's a good resource as well. Although, hey, he's sitting right there.
Other questions? If I can ask Alice, going by what Dr. Rick was saying about getting change, I'm also concerned with the laboratories who participate in that study. Are they going to get people to participate? And I think, have you thought about that when you're talking to other lab directors who may be participating in that study?
So first and foremost, the participants in that survey are voluntary and anonymous. The laboratories themselves are going to be anonymous. The data will be aggregated and published, but so no one will ever know who it is and what they said. So that helps provide a bit of safety to folks who are feeling a little anxious about that. What happened is that before this meeting in the month of May, Dr. Levin and Heidi Putney visited all of the laboratories who are going to participate in the process and sat down with our management and had a discussion about what causes stress in your organization, what are the things that cause burnout, what do people see in your organization, what employees of different types, would administrative people see things that would give them vicarious trauma problems. So that the conversation was had with management so that then management could educate their employees and encourage them. They can't require them to do it because it is voluntary, but they could encourage them to participate with the hope that the team could come back and help work with the organization to improve the way they deal with stress and trauma, but also it could help the wider community in the longer term with research.
Thank you.
Okay, if I could maybe add a comment, because I'll out ourselves and that we're one of the participating crime labs. And it just was a very coincidental time. We just had a discussion in one of our lab leadership meetings about vicarious trauma. And one of the things we're trying to do is we kind of sort of throw out different ideas to staff, because there are a lot of different things you can participate in, and it's very difficult to do everything. So we kind of throw out ideas, and my gauge is what takes is what people decide they're going to participate in. If they are going to spend their time, I find that it's likely going to be worthwhile. So we put out a little mini survey of ourselves just to gauge our participation. Over 25% of our staff responded to that survey internally about stress and trauma. So we became one of these test labs, so to speak, had Dr. Levin out to kind of go through the process. So we're excited about something that we can see our staff has an interest in it. They have by themselves with our facilitation struck up a committee with lab staff and be working on it. So we're excited to participate and really try to meet the needs of our staff.
I have a question for Alice. Sorry, I have a question for Alice too. What I hear from my staff is usually we're not feeling stressed. I can handle the autopsies fine. Crime scenes don't bother me. I've been doing it my entire career. So getting an idea or getting a handle on what they're actually feeling but not recognizing and what they're truly able to handle on their own is very difficult for me. So I saw one of your slides, you talked about denial, but can you talk a little bit about that in your discussions?
About the what?
Denial?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the staff actually denying that they're feeling stressed. So
Okay.
what's passive and what's really expressed?
We talked about this a lot in the workshop on Monday. There are categories of employees who tend to respond to this differently. We anecdotally talked about how first responders and sworn officers, emergency service providers tend to bottle it up and can really compartmentalize this sort of thing. But our scientists tend to be people who will talk about it more and deal with it more. But the fact of the matter is you can't predict it. And I just preface this with, this is not my subject matter expertise. This is just, I'm speaking on just what I've learned from being a part of this group and participating in the workshop. I'm not a mental health professional, nor do I understand all that. But what we have discussed is that you can't predict how a person may react or when they may react to a situation that causes them vicarious trauma. They may do it for years before just one day they see I'll give an example. They're driving through a town where they worked a case and they knew there was a rape on a street corner, and they drive past that street corner and they feel a panic or something like that. So it's incredibly difficult, I think, to predict which of your employees might react or not. So I think what we're seeing is it's important to offer services and assistance to all of your employees, but also make it a normal thing to talk about it. The more you talk about it, the more everyone understands this is real, this happens, and I shouldn't feel embarrassed or ashamed that I'm feeling stressed or panicked, or I have burnout, I'm depressed, whatever that reaction may be, it's normal, and we need to be there and be able to provide them the assistance they need to work through that through appropriate channels.
Yeah, I think also this is something hopefully it will help people at their work, but they can also take back home in their personal life, because we all bring stress from work to home and also from home to work. So I'm very excited that ASCOD has been moving forward with this these last 2 years. So,
Can I ask Demia one more question? So can you talk about the balance between antemortem toxicology, driving toxicology, and postmortem toxicology in the data that you're actually collecting? Do you want all three of them? Are you going to do it in stages? Are you mixing driving with antemortem, human performance type stuff? A little bit about the kind of data that you want with tox?
Right now we're collecting it all, trying to understand the difference and taking as many toxicology laboratories that are willing to share the data, because some are so specific that they only do one type of testing and others have a breadth. And what we found is to make it easier, it's easier to take it and then decide what is not necessarily applicable than to have you filter through it and take more of your time or take more of the
Want us to ship
laboratory
you
time.
everything.
Just ship us everything.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
okay, just prior to wrapping up, I'd just like to remind you that the ASCOD board meeting will be after the break at 10:30. The business meeting, sorry. At the business meeting, there will be presentations, 2-minute presentations from the 4 board candidates. And also, please make sure if you're a regular member and if you're a new regular member, to get your paperwork for the ASCOD bylaws and also the voting form for the candidates. At the beginning of the business meeting, near the beginning, we will be going through the bylaws. So if you have any questions, please be ready to ask them at that time. And then we'll be asking you to vote, and then we will be going through the 4 presentations and then asking you to vote then, so that we can do the counting of the vote prior to the ending of the business meeting. So I'd like to just say for the last moment, thank all the presenters for this morning's great presentations, and just say thank you.